The time was 6:42 a.m. I know this because the digital clock on my coffee maker, a simple black box I've had for 15 years, has a display of bright red numerals that catch my eye every morning when I come downstairs. It is part of the ritual: the click of the thermostat, the hum of the refrigerator, the red glow of the numbers. 6:42. And then, the new addition to my morning routine, the sound of crunching gravel, followed by the specific whine of an undersized engine straining against the damp earth of my wheat field. I stood at my kitchen window, holding a warm ceramic mug. The coffee inside was black. Steam ghosted up and fogged a small patch on the glass, which I wiped away with my sleeve. Outside, the world was gray and soft with pre-dawn light. A fine mist hung over the landscape, clinging to the golden heads of the wheat I had planted in the spring. And bisecting that field, two deep, muddy ruts that were not there yesterday, was a silver crossover SUV, the kind that is designed to look rugged but would get stuck in a patch of wet grass. At the wheel was Brenda. She wasn't just driving through it, she was stopped. Her driver's side door was open, and she was out of the car, phone to her ear, gesticulating at the far side of my property, as if directing troop movements. Her voice, thin and sharp, carried across the damp air. She was wearing yoga pants and a bright pink fleece jacket, an outfit of aggressive leisure. She looked entirely out of place, a garish splash of color against the muted greens and golds of my land. She looked like an invasive species. I did not go outside. Not yet. I simply watched. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and bitter, the way I like it. I noted the make and model of her car. I noted her license plate, though I already knew it by heart. I took my own phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and began recording a video through the window. The quality was not cinematic, but it was clear. It showed her car. It showed her standing in the middle of my field. It showed the twin scars her tires had carved into the soil, crushing hundreds of stalks of wheat just weeks from harvest. This was the third time she had done this. The first two times, I had assumed it was a mistake, a miscalculation, a singular lapse in judgment. I am a man who believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt, at least initially. But the third time, coupled with her proprietary stance and her phone call, was not a mistake. It was a declaration. After a few minutes, she got back in her car, slammed the door, and drove the remaining 100 yards, emerging onto the county road on the other side. A shortcut. She had turned my private agricultural land into a personal thoroughfare to shave 30 seconds off her commute to the yoga studio. I finished my coffee. I washed the mug, placed it in the drying rack, and went to my study. I turned on my computer and saved the video file to a dedicated folder on my hard drive. The folder was named, simply, Brenda. Inside, it was organized into subfolders by date. I created a new folder for today and dropped the video inside. Then, I opened a Word document and began to type. At approximately 6:42 a.m., I wrote, Brenda Clark, president of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association, did knowingly and without permission drive her vehicle, a silver Lexus RX 350 license plate, onto my property, designated as Parcel YD. I was precise, I was thorough, I was, in my own quiet way, getting to work. I walked out the back door and across my lawn to the edge of the field. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and growing things. I knelt down, the tires had churned the soft ground, breaking the stalks and pressing the heads of wheat into the mud. The damage was not catastrophic in a financial sense. This little field was a hobby, not a livelihood. It was a connection to my grandfather, who had farmed this land, and a project my wife, Eleanor, and I had started together before she passed. It was a place of order, of predictable cycles. Seed, water, sun, harvest. A simple, honest equation. Brenda's ruts were a slash of irrationality through the center of it. I took several high-resolution photos of the damage with my phone, making sure to get wide shots, showing the full path and close-ups of the crushed wheat. I uploaded them to the same folder. Later that day, I saw her again. She was walking her dog, a small, yapping creature that matched her energy. She saw me checking my mailbox at the end of my long driveway. She strode over, the dog straining on its leash. "Morning," she said, though it was well past noon. Her tone was not friendly. It was the tone of a manager addressing a subordinate. I nodded. "Brenda, I need you to do something about the mud," she said. It was not a request. I looked at her, my face impassive. "The mud?" "Yes," she said with a wave of her hand toward my field. "The shortcut is getting torn up. When it rained last night, my tires could barely get traction. You should lay down some gravel, for the community." I stared at her for a long moment. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was something to behold. It was like a burglar complaining that the window he broke was too sharp. I considered several responses. I could have yelled. I could have threatened to call the sheriff. I could have pointed out the fundamental lunacy of her statement. Instead, I chose a different path. "The shortcut," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yes," she said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "The access road. It's been used for years. It's a community right-of-way. Frankly, letting it get this muddy is a liability. The HOA could even fine you for failing to maintain it." She had no idea. She had no idea of the legal distinction between a license, an easement, and a right-of-way. She had no idea that I had the original 1958 plat map for this entire area sitting in a fireproof box in my study. She had no idea that my entire 40-year career was built on the precise understanding of land use, water rights, and property law. She saw a quiet old man in a flannel shirt, a widower who kept to himself, a soft target. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man who had spent his life drafting the rules of engagement. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how we got here. It's important to understand the context. This wasn't just about a path through a field. It was about the slow, creeping rot of entitlement and the weaponization of petty power. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 68 years old. For 41 years I was a civil engineer. My specialty was hydrology and land management for municipal and state governments. I didn't design bridges or skyscrapers. I designed water tables, drainage systems, and floodplains. I wrote zoning ordinances. I spent my days reading surveys, deeds, and environmental impact reports. My job was to understand in excruciating detail what a piece of land was, what it had been, and what it could legally become. I lived in a world of metes and bounds, of setbacks and easements, of covenants and restrictions. It was a world of paper, and on paper, things had to be correct. On paper, there was no room for interpretation or feeling. There was only what was documented. I retired 3 years ago, a year after my wife Eleanor died. Eleanor and I bought this house, the original farmhouse for this area, 35 years ago. It came with 10 acres of land, a small island of history surrounded by what was then just empty fields. She was the one who loved this place. She loved the old walls, the creaking floors, the big stone fireplace. I loved the quiet. I loved the solid, unchanging nature of it. For 20 years it was just us, the county road out front, and a handful of distant neighbors. Then came the developer. He bought the 200 acres surrounding us and put up the Oak Hollow subdivision. It was a sea of beige houses with identical floor plans and postage stamp lawns. We were offered a fortune for our 10 acres, but Eleanor wouldn't hear of it. "You can't buy this kind of quiet, Arthur," she'd said. "You can only keep it." So we stayed. The developer, a reasonable man named Bill, was accommodating. To get his heavy equipment to the far side of the development without tearing up the new streets he was laying, he asked if he could use a dirt track that ran along the edge of our property. It was the same path Brenda now called a shortcut. Eleanor, being the generous soul she was, agreed. But I, being the cautious man I was, insisted on paper. I drafted a temporary license agreement. It was a simple, one-page document. It granted the development company, and only the development company, a revocable license to use the path for the explicit purpose of construction access. It specified that the license would automatically terminate upon the sale of the final home in Phase 3 of the development, or within 5 years, whichever came first. It stipulated that the license did not run with the land and was not transferable. Bill, the developer, signed it. I signed it. We had it notarized. I filed a copy with the county recorder's office and put the original in our safe deposit box. On paper it was clear. The construction finished. The house is sold. The license terminated, exactly as written 12 years ago. For a while, the path grew over with grass. Nobody used it. The new residents, the people of Oak Hollow, used their paved driveways and the pristine asphalt streets. Life was quiet again. Brenda Clark moved in about 8 years ago. She was a real estate agent who had sold a number of the houses in the development, and she carried herself with the air of someone who felt she had a founder's stake in the community. She was energetic, charismatic, in a superficial way, and deeply, deeply interested in other people's business. Within a year, she had maneuvered her way onto the HOA board. A year after that, she was its president, and that's when the notices started. At first they were small things. Mr. Henderson, 2 doors down from the HOA's entrance, was fined $50 because his trash cans were visible from the street an hour past the designated time. Mrs. Gable was sent a violation notice because the shade of white she painted her trim was eggshell instead of the approved ivory. The rules were all there, buried in the 100-page book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and Rs, but they had never been enforced with such militaristic zeal. Brenda's reign was built on a foundation of public performance. She would walk the neighborhood every morning, clipboard in hand, making notes. She loved to confront people directly, not in private, but on their front lawns, in front of their neighbors. It was about dominance. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was asserting her authority over the community's aesthetic, its very character. Eleanor, who had time for everyone, tried to reason with her. She invited Brenda over for iced tea on our porch. She tried to explain the difference between a community and a police state. Brenda just smiled, complimented Eleanor on her roses, and a week later sent us a formal warning that our mailbox, the original rural box that had been there for 50 years, was not an HOA-approved model. That was the day I started the folder. It seemed like a ridiculous, paranoid thing to do at the time, but I'd spent a lifetime seeing how small disputes could fester and grow into costly legal battles. Documentation was the only antidote, so I bought a simple accordion file from the office supply store. I labeled the first tab, Mailbox. I put her warning letter inside. When we replaced the mailbox with a compliant one, I put the receipt for the new box and a photo of it in the file. I kept the receipts. After Eleanor passed, I became even more withdrawn. The grief was a heavy cloak. I focused on my routines and the quiet maintenance of the house and the land she had loved so much. I didn't have the energy for neighborhood politics. I paid the HOA dues, even though I had a strong legal argument that my parcel was exempt. It was easier than fighting. When Brenda sent a notice that the paint on my barn was peeling, I didn't argue. I just hired a painter, got a receipt, took a photo, and added it to the folder. The folder grew thicker. It had tabs for landscaping, barn maintenance, and fence line. It was a quiet, meticulous record of compliance. The shortcut issue began subtly. About a year ago, I noticed tire tracks, a single set. They appeared after a heavy rain. I walked the path and saw where a car had gotten briefly stuck and then powered its way out. I thought it was a teenager or someone lost. I didn't think much of it. Then it happened again a few months later. The first time I saw Brenda do it, it was an evening in late spring. I was on the porch reading. Her silver SUV came down the main road, slowed, and then, instead of following the curve toward her own street, she simply turned and bumped over the curb, driving right onto the grassy path. It was so blatant, so casual. She wasn't being discreet. She acted as if it was the most natural thing in the world. That's when I understood. This wasn't an occasional mistake. This was a habit. She had, in her own mind, annexed a piece of my property, She had decided that her convenience superseded my ownership. The path had been a kindness, extended by my wife to a builder long ago. Brenda had twisted it into a right. So I continued to document. I bought a small, cellular trail camera, the kind hunters use, and mounted it discreetly on an old oak tree overlooking the path. It was motion-activated. It sent a picture to my phone every time something passed. For the next 2 months, I got an alert almost every weekday morning between 6:40 and 7 a.m. and every afternoon around 5:30 p.m. It was Brenda. Sometimes she had a passenger. Once she was followed by another car, a neighbor she had apparently inducted into her secret society of shortcutters. Each photo was saved, dated, filed, which brings us back to her demand that I lay down gravel. It was the turning point. It was one thing to trespass. It was another thing entirely to demand that I improve the path of her trespass for her convenience, and then threaten me with a fine from the very organization she controlled. It was a level of gall that could not be ignored. That afternoon, after our conversation at the mailbox, I went back to my study. I pulled out the accordion file, now bulging with 3 years of meticulous records. I took out the original, notarized temporary license agreement from 1999. I took out the deed to my property, which clearly described my 10 acres, with no mention of any permanent easement or right-of-way. I took out a copy of the official county plat map. On paper, my case was a fortress. My first step was the formal warning. Arguing with Brenda in person was pointless. She operated in a realm of emotion and dominance, not facts. I needed a record. I composed a formal letter. It was polite, professional, and unyielding. It began, "Dear Miss Clark, this letter serves as formal notice that the path you have been using to cross my property, parcel ID key is private land. Your use of this path constitutes trespass." I went on to cite the specific state statutes regarding criminal trespass. I explained in simple terms that no public or private right-of-way exists. I attached a copy of my deed's legal description and a marked-up copy of the plat map showing the boundaries of my property. I did not mention the old license agreement. That was an ace I intended to hold back. I concluded the letter by stating that any further passage across my land, by her or any other person at her direction, would result in legal action. I did not send it via email. I sent it via certified mail with a return receipt requested. This is a crucial step. It creates a legal record that the recipient has received the document. Her signature on that little green card would be proof. I also sent an identical copy to the HOA's official address, addressed to the board of directors, again, via certified mail. I wanted the entire board to be on notice. I wanted no one to be able to claim they didn't know. I kept the receipts. A week went by. The green signature cards came back in the mail. One was signed by Brenda Clark. The other was signed by Sarah, the board secretary. They had received the warnings. For 3 days the path remained quiet. The trail camera sent no alerts. I allowed myself a small flicker of hope that the simple, clear presentation of facts had been enough. I was wrong. On the 4th day at 6:49 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a photo from the trail cam, Brenda's silver Lexus, pushing through the wheat. She hadn't just ignored my warning. She was defying it. That same day, I received an email from the official HOA account. It was from Brenda. It was a masterpiece of passive, aggressive corporate speak. "Dear Mr. Pendleton," it read, "we are in receipt of your letter regarding the community access path. After a review of the historical use of this path by residents, the board has determined that a prescriptive easement exists, and your attempt to close it is not in keeping with community standards or the governing documents. We consider this matter closed. Furthermore, we have received a complaint about an unapproved surveillance device on your property, pointed towards community areas. Please see attached violation notice number 214. Attached was a PDF, a formal notice of violation for the trail camera, carrying a fine of $200. She wasn't just ignoring me. She was attacking. She had invented a legal concept, the prescriptive easement, out of thin air, and was using the HOA's power to punish me for documenting her own illegal acts. She had no idea how wrong she was. A prescriptive easement in our state required 20 years of open, notorious, and adverse use. This path had been unused for most of the last decade, and its prior use was by permission, under a written license, which is the exact opposite of adverse. She was just throwing around legal terms she'd probably heard on a television show. I saved the email and the violation notice to the folder. I did not reply. Replying would be to engage in her game, a back and forth of baseless claims. It was time to stop writing letters and start building. I am not a welder by trade, but I am a man who understands materials and construction. In my barn, I have a small workshop. For the next 3 days, I worked. I bought 10-foot lengths of 2-inch square steel tubing, thick-walled and heavy. I bought a heavy-duty hinge assembly and a locking mechanism designed for industrial gates. I spent a full day cutting the steel to size and laying it out on the concrete floor of my barn. I designed a simple, strong gate, a rectangular frame with vertical bars every 6 inches. It was not ornate. It was brutally functional. The welding took another day. The smell of hot metal and ozone filled the barn. I laid each bead carefully, ensuring full penetration. I was building a wall, not a gate. When it was finished, I ground the welds smooth and painted the entire structure with 3 coats of rust-proof black paint. It weighed nearly 400 pounds. The final piece of the plan involved concrete. On a Saturday morning, I rented a power auger. I dug 2 holes, each 3 feet deep, on either side of the trespasser's path, exactly on my property line, as marked by the official survey pins I had located weeks before. Into one hole I set a 6-inch square steel post for the hinges, into the other a post for the lock. I braced them perfectly plumb, and then mixed and poured 80 pounds of concrete into each hole. I troweled the tops smooth. On paper, this was an improvement to my property, a fence, perfectly legal. I let the concrete cure for 2 full days. Then, on Monday evening, using a chain hoist rigged to a beam in my barn, I lifted the massive gate onto my utility trailer and drove it to the head of the path. With the help of a pry bar and a lot of grunting, I hung it on the hinges. It swung smoothly, a testament to careful measurement. I closed it. The heavy steel latch dropped into place. I snapped a heavy, case-hardened padlock through the mechanism. The key felt solid and final in my hand. The path was closed. The shortcut was gone. I stood back and looked at my work. The black gate was a stark, geometric shape against the organic softness of the field. It was a full stop, a period at the end of a sentence. I went back inside, made a cup of tea, and waited. I did not have to wait long. The next morning, at 6:45 a.m., my phone rang. It was not a text alert from the trail cam. It was a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Same number. I ignored it. A third time. This was the pattern of someone who could not believe they were being ignored. Finally, my house phone, a landline I keep for emergencies, began to ring. The caller ID showed Oak Hollow HOA. I answered, but said nothing. "Arthur!" Brenda's voice was a screech of pure fury. "What have you done? What is this thing? You have blocked the road." "Hello, Brenda," I said calmly. "To what road are you referring?" "The shortcut, my road. You have put up a barricade. You can't do that. I'm going to be late for my class. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the county. I'll have you arrested for this." The threats tumbled out one after another. "You do what you feel you have to do," I said, and gently hung up the phone. I made my coffee and stood at my kitchen window. I didn't need a trail camera to see what was happening. Brenda's silver Lexus was parked at an angle in front of the gate. She was out of the car, pacing back and forth, phone clamped to her ear. She was putting on a performance for an audience of one, me. She pointed at the gate. She pointed at my house. Her body language was a symphony of outrage. About 20 minutes later, a county sheriff's patrol car pulled up. Two deputies got out. One was older, with a weary, seen-it-all look on his face. The other was younger, sharp, and observant. Brenda immediately descended upon them, a torrent of words and frantic gestures. From my window, I could see her pointing at the gate, at her car, at my field, at my house. She was playing the victim, a distressed resident being harassed by a crazy old recluse. The deputies listened patiently. The older one nodded along, while the younger one looked from Brenda to the gate, and then up my driveway toward my house. He had a thoughtful expression. After several minutes of Brenda's monologue, the older deputy held up a hand to stop her, and started walking up my driveway with his partner. I met them on my front porch. I was holding a thin, manila folder. Not the big accordion file, just a small one with the essentials. "Good morning, officers," I said quietly. "Morning, sir," the older deputy said. His name tag read, Miller. "We're here because we received a complaint about a public road being illegally blocked." "I see," I said. "And who made that complaint?" "The lady down there, Miss Clark." "And did Miss Clark identify which public road has been blocked?" I asked. My tone was one of genuine, academic curiosity. Deputy Miller sighed. It was the sigh of a man who dealt with this sort of thing 10 times a day. "Sir, she claims that path has been a road for years, and you just put up this gate this morning to harass her." "This is my property," I said simply. I opened the folder. The first document on top was a large, clear satellite photograph of my property, with the boundaries outlined in red. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I own this house and the 10 acres it sits on. What Ms. Clark refers to as a road is a private path on my agricultural land." The younger deputy, whose name tag read Evans, leaned in to look. "Is this an official survey, sir?" "No, this is just for illustration," I said. This, however, I slid the satellite photo back and revealed the next document is a certified copy of the deed to my property, filed with the county recorder's office. You'll note the legal description of the boundaries. And this, I produced the next sheet, is a copy of the official county plat map, showing my parcel, Lot 1, and the surrounding subdivision. As you can see, there is no road, easement, or public right-of-way designated in that location. Deputy Evans took the documents and studied them. He was sharp. He traced the lines on the plat map with his finger, then looked at the deed, then back at the map. Deputy Miller just watched me, his eyes assessing. He was reading me, not the papers. "She claims it's a prescriptive easement," Miller said, testing the phrase. "A prescriptive easement in this state requires 20 years of continuous, open, and adverse use," I replied, without missing a beat. "That path was created by a temporary and revocable license, granted to the developer 12 years ago for construction, which has long since expired. Since then, it has been largely unused, until Miss Clark began trespassing approximately 1 year ago. Her use has been neither for the required duration, nor was it ever adverse until I sent her a formal notice to cease, which she ignored." I spoke calmly, stating facts, not arguing. Down at the road, Brenda was starting to get agitated. She was yelling something we couldn't make out. Deputy Evans handed the papers back to me. He looked at his partner and gave a slight shake of his head. "Seems open and shut, Frank. It's his land." Deputy Miller nodded. He turned back to me. "Sir, we appreciate your cooperation. This is a civil matter. We can't force you to take the gate down. It's on your property." "I understand," I said. "For the record, officers, I would like to state that the gate was erected to prevent further criminal trespass and damage to my crops by Miss Brenda Clark, who I have formally notified to cease her activities. I have video and photographic evidence of her repeated trespass and the damage caused. The gate itself is a legal fence structure, located entirely within my property boundaries." I made sure my words were clear and precise. I wanted them in the report. "We'll put that in our report, sir," Deputy Evans said, making a note in his pad. They walked back down the driveway. I stayed on the porch and watched. The conversation with Brenda was much shorter this time. Deputy Miller did most of the talking. Brenda's arms went from waving frantically to crossing over her chest to hanging limply at her sides. Her performance had failed. The authority figures she had summoned had not bent to her will. They had been swayed by something she could not comprehend. Documented reality. After a few more minutes, the deputies got in their car and left. Brenda stood there, staring at the gate. It was a solid, black, immovable fact. She got into her Lexus, slammed the door so hard I heard it from the porch, and executed a furious three-point turn, her tires spitting gravel. She drove away, taking the long way around. I went back inside and made a new entry in my log. I noted the time of the deputies' visit, their names, and a summary of our conversation. The police report they would file would become another piece of evidence. Brenda thought she was bringing the hammer down on me. Instead, she had just handed me a shield, officially witnessed and documented by the county sheriff's department. She had no idea how badly she had just misplayed her hand. The next 2 weeks were quiet, eerily so. The trail camera showed nothing but deer at night and squirrels during the day. No silver Lexus. No angry HOA president. Brenda's car took the long way around the neighborhood every morning and every evening. From my vantage point, it seemed like a victory. But I knew better. People like Brenda do not simply give up. They don't learn from their mistakes. They recalibrate. They escalate. I knew this was not the end. It was the eye of the storm. During this lull, I continued my preparations. I called my old colleague, David Chen. David had been the head surveyor for the county for 30 years before he retired. He was a master of the archives, a man who could read the history of a place in the faint, spidery ink of a 100-year-old map. I took him to lunch. "Arthur, you old hermit," he said, grinning as we sat down. "I thought you'd fossilized in that farmhouse of yours. What's the emergency? Someone build a dam upstream of you?" "Worse," I said. "An HOA." David groaned. "Say no more. The bane of a surveyor's existence. Let me guess. They think a fence is an inch over a line that they drew with a crayon on a napkin." "Something like that," I said. I laid out the story for him. The shortcut, the letters, the gate, the police report. He listened intently, nodding. When I got to the part about Brenda claiming a prescriptive easement, he let out a short, sharp laugh. "Amateurs," he said, shaking his head. "They learn one legal phrase and think it's a magic wand. So what do you need from me?" "I want to find the bombshell, David," I said. "I have the deed, the plat map, the expired license. That's enough to win in court, I know. But I want something that ends it, something undeniable. I want to check the original subdivision filing, the master plan, the documents the developer filed when Oak Hollow was first created. I have a feeling my property was handled in a very specific way, and I want to find the exact wording." "You want the deed of dedication and the declaration of covenants," he said, his eyes lighting up. "The source code." "Good idea. Brenda is working from her little HOA rulebook. You need to go back to the documents that created the HOA in the first place. Let's go digging." The next day, we went down to the county records office. It's a place that smells of old paper and dust. A library of deeds and titles. David moved through the archives like a native. He knew which books to pull, which microfiche to load. We spent hours scrolling through brittle pages and faded text. And then we found it, the original Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions for the Oak Hollow subdivision. It was a thick document, filed by the developer, Bill, all those years ago. It was the legal instrument that created the HOA and gave it power, and on page 3 under a section titled Properties Subject to this Declaration was a subsection, Section 2.2. Properties expressly excluded. My hand trembled slightly as I read the text. It stated in dense but clear legalese that a certain property, described in detail by its parcel ID and legal description, was expressly and perpetually excluded from the purview, governance, and assessment of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. It was my property, my 10 acres, The farmhouse, the barn, the field. It was the bombshell. My exemption from the HOA wasn't just an argument I could make. It was a foundational, recorded, legal fact written into the very document that gave the HOA its existence. Brenda wasn't just my adversary. She was, legally speaking, a complete stranger. Her fines were toilet paper. Her violation notices were junk mail. Her authority over me was, and had always been, a complete fiction. On paper, she had less power over my property than a man on the moon. "Well, I'll be," David said, leaning back. "He carved you out completely. You're not an HOA member, Arthur. You never were." I had paid dues for years. I had complied with violation notices. I had done it to be a good neighbor, to avoid conflict, to honor what I thought was a community obligation after Eleanor died. I had done it because it was easier than fighting. I felt a slow, cold anger rising in me, not just at Brenda, but at myself, for not checking this sooner, for letting it go on. "I kept the receipts," I murmured, "every check, every notice." "Good man," David said, clapping me on the shoulder. "That's not just a defense anymore, Arthur. That's a counterclaim. They've been extorting money from you for years. We made certified copies of the entire document." As we were packing up, my phone buzzed. It was an email, not from Brenda this time, but from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line was just HOA meeting. I opened it. The message was short. "Mr. Pendleton, I am a member of the HOA board. Brenda has called a special executive session to authorize legal action against you, to have the gate removed, and to place a lien on your property for the fines and the cost of removal. She is telling the board you are a dangerous and unstable individual. This is wrong. I have the minutes from past meetings she has altered. Please be careful. She is trying to ruin you." The email was unsigned. This was the disillusioned insider, the crack in Brenda's wall of authority. She had pushed too far, and someone on her own team was breaking ranks. That evening, another unexpected event. My doorbell rang. It was Mr. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, the gardener. He was holding a worn shoebox, clutching it to his chest like a holy relic. His hands were shaking. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I saw the sheriff. I saw the gate. You're fighting her." "I'm protecting my property, Mr. Henderson," I said gently. "She's a bully," he said, his eyes watery. "A terrible, terrible bully. For 5 years she's made my life a misery. My roses are the wrong color. My birdbath is an unapproved structure. Fines, fines, fines. My wife, before she passed, she loved my garden. Now, I'm afraid to even plant anything." He pushed the shoebox into my hands. "I heard she's coming after you. I want you to have this. Maybe it will help?" I took him inside and made him a cup of tea. While he drank it, I opened the box. It was filled with photographs. Dozens of them. Each one showed a part of his meticulously kept garden. And with each photo was a corresponding HOA violation notice from Brenda, and a canceled check for the fine he had paid. He had documented everything. It was a heartbreaking, perfect record of systematic harassment. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, digital audio recorder. "The board meetings, she has a way of twisting things. So I started recording them. The one where she decided my garden gnomes were a safety hazard is on here." This was the fearful ally, no longer afraid. He was providing the human story, the pattern of abuse that would give context to my own fight. My folder was no longer just about me. It was about the neighborhood. The final escalation came 2 days later. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. It was a lawsuit. Brenda, on behalf of the Oak Hollow HOA, had filed a petition in county court. It sought an injunction to force the removal of my gate. It asked the court to affirm the existence of a prescriptive easement. It demanded payment for the outstanding fines. And it included a motion for a temporary restraining order against me, claiming I was a threat to Brenda's safety. The lawsuit was a work of fiction, a fantasy novel written in the language of the law. It was also going to be very, very expensive for the HOA. I read the entire document all 60 pages of it, with a calm, analytical eye. It was aggressive, it was baseless, and it was the single biggest mistake Brenda could have possibly made. She had taken our dispute out of the realm of angry emails and HOA meetings and moved it into a courtroom. She had brought it to my home turf, a place where feelings didn't matter and documents were king. I picked up the phone and called a lawyer I knew, a man named Tom Billings, who specialized in real estate litigation. "Tom," I said, "it's Arthur Pendleton. I have a small property dispute I need your help with, and I believe I have a rather robust file of supporting documentation." The confrontation was set for a preliminary injunction hearing 2 weeks later. Brenda wanted the judge to order me to tear down the gate immediately, before the full case was even heard. The setting was courtroom 4B of the county courthouse, a sterile, wood-paneled room that felt 1,000 miles away from my quiet wheat field. The room was surprisingly full. Brenda had rallied her troops. About a dozen Oak Hollow residents were there, sitting behind her and her lawyer. They were the ones who benefited from her iron-fisted rule, or were too afraid to cross her. On my side, I had Tom, my lawyer, David, the surveyor, who had agreed to be an expert witness, and, to my surprise, Mr. Henderson and Sarah, the board secretary. They sat quietly in the back row, a small island of moral support. Brenda was dressed in a severe navy blue suit, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked every inch the powerful executive. She was radiating confidence. She smiled and nodded at her supporters. She was performing. This was her stage. She believed the force of her personality, her narrative of the folksy community versus the cranky old man, would carry the day. Her lawyer, a slick young man with too much gel in his hair, began. He laid out their case with broad, emotional strokes. He spoke of decades of historic use, of the community fabric, of the vital nature of this path for residents. He painted me as an antisocial aggressor who had taken the law into his own hands by erecting a dangerous and illegal blockade. Then Brenda took the stand. Her lawyer led her through a series of softball questions. Her voice was soft, trembling with manufactured emotion. She spoke of her fear. She said she was afraid to even leave her house. She claimed I had stared at her menacingly. She described the gate not as a gate, but as a hostile fortification. "And why is this path so important to you, Ms. Clark?" her lawyer asked, teeing her up for the big finish. Tears welled in her eyes. It was a masterful performance. "It's not just for me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's for the community. It's for the elderly residents who need a quicker way to the main road. It's for the children, walking to their friends' houses. It's a part of Oak Hollow. He's trying to steal a part of our home." The judge, a woman in her 60s, with a weary but intelligent face, named Judge Marion Miles, listened impassively. She made a few notes. When Brenda's testimony was finished, she looked at my lawyer. "Mr. Billings, your witness." Tom stood up. He was the opposite of Brenda's lawyer. He was older, rumpled, and looked more like a history professor than a litigator. "Ms. Clark," he began, his voice calm and even, "you've testified that this path has been in use for decades. Is that correct?" "Yes, as long as the neighborhood has been here," Brenda said confidently. "And you've testified that you are the president of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association, and that you bring this action on their behalf." "That is correct." "And in your capacity as president, you are familiar with the HOA's founding documents? The Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Brenda's face. "Of course." "Good." Tom walked over to our table and picked up a thick-bound document. "I'm handing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A. This is a certified copy of the Declaration of Covenants for the Oak Hollow subdivision, filed on October 17, 1999, with the county recorder. Could you please turn to page 3, section 2.2? Brenda fumbled with the pages. Her lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?" "I believe the relevance will become immediately apparent, Your Honor," Tom said. "Overruled." The witness will answer, the judge said, leaning forward slightly. Brenda found the page. Tom let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Could you please read Section 2.2, titled Properties Expressly Excluded, aloud for the court? Brenda's eyes scanned the text. The color drained from her face. The mask of confident outrage began to crack, replaced by a blank, slack-jawed confusion. She stared at the page as if it were written in a foreign language. She had no idea this document existed. She had built her entire kingdom on a rule book, never once thinking to read the Constitution that created it. "Miss Clark?" the judge prompted. Brenda swallowed. Her voice was a dry rasp. She read, stumbling over the words. The property designated as Parcel ID 74-2B-881 is hereby expressly and perpetually excluded from the purview, governance, and assessment of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. She trailed off. "So, to be clear, Miss Clark," Tom said, his voice still gentle, "the very document that creates your HOA explicitly states that you have absolutely no authority over Mr. Pendleton's property. Is that not what it says?" Brenda was silent. She just stared at the paper. "Is it not true, Ms. Clark, that the HOA, under your direction, has been sending violation notices and levying fines against a man who is not, and has never been, a member of your association?" Silence. "Is it not true that you have cashed checks from Mr. Pendleton for HOA dues and fines, money you had no legal right to demand?" Tom's voice was getting harder now. He placed a stack of canceled checks, Exhibit B, on the witness stand. The collapse was happening. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, internal implosion. The performative tears were gone. The righteous anger was gone. All that was left was the raw, naked shock of a tyrant who had just run headfirst into a wall of fact she didn't know was there. Her supporters in the gallery were murmuring, looking at each other in confusion. Tom wasn't finished. He proceeded, step by step, to dismantle her entire narrative. He produced the temporary license agreement, Exhibit C, proving the original use of the path was by permission, not adverse. He produced the certified letters, Exhibit D, proving she had been formally warned about her trespassing. He produced the police report, Exhibit E, showing that the sheriff's deputies had confirmed my ownership and the civil nature of the dispute. He produced the high-resolution photos of the damage to my wheat, Exhibit F. The final blow was a sworn affidavit from Sarah, the board secretary, Exhibit G. It detailed how Brenda had called the vote to sue me without a proper quorum and had misrepresented the facts of the case to the other board members. When he was done, there was nothing left of Brenda's case. It was a heap of smoking rubble. Her lawyer looked stunned. Brenda just sat there, hollowed out. The judge took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "Mr. Billings," she said, her voice dripping with restrained anger, "are you planning to file a counterclaim?" "We are, Your Honor," Tom said, "for the return of all monies paid, for damages to my client's property, for legal fees, and for punitive damages related to the filing of this frivolous and malicious lawsuit." Judge Miles looked at Brenda, then at her lawyer. "The request for a preliminary injunction is denied. I am dismissing this case with prejudice. I am also sanctioning you, counsel, for filing a suit with absolutely no basis in fact or law. And Ms. Clark," the judge's voice was ice, "I would advise you to find an excellent defense attorney. I have a feeling you are going to need one." The gavel came down. It was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal, but I experienced it mostly from a distance, through emails from Tom and quiet conversations over the fence with Mr. Henderson. The HOA's lawsuit was dismissed, as the judge had ordered. My counterclaim, however, proceeded. Faced with a mountain of evidence, the illegal fines, the extortion of dues from a non-member, the malicious prosecution, the HOA's insurance carrier quickly settled. They paid back every penny I had ever given them, with interest. They paid for the damage to my field. And they paid every cent of Tom's legal fees. On paper, I was made whole. For Brenda, the consequences were far more severe. The judge, true to her word, reported her and her lawyer to the State Bar Association for filing a frivolous lawsuit. The lawyer received a public reprimand, but Brenda's real punishment came from the community she had tried to dominate. Sarah, the secretary, armed with the revelations from the hearing, called for an emergency meeting of all Oak Hollow homeowners. She presented the evidence. The fact that Brenda had sued a non-member using their dues, the altered meeting minutes, the lies she had told the board. Mr. Henderson, no longer fearful, stood up at that meeting and, with his voice shaking but strong, told his story of the years of harassment over his garden. Others followed. A dam of fear had broken, and a flood of grievances poured out. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote of no confidence. Brenda was recalled as president and removed from the board entirely. The public humiliation was total. Her power, built on a scaffold of bluster and performance, had evaporated overnight. The people she had bullied for years now looked at her with contempt. The supporters who had sat behind her in court now crossed the street to avoid her. Within 6 months, a "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn. The house sold quickly. I never saw her again. The community began to heal. Sarah was elected the new HOA president. Her first act was to commission a complete review of the CC&Rs and the bylaws. They rescinded dozens of the most punitive and ridiculous rules. The violation notices stopped. Mr. Henderson's garden began to flourish with a defiant variety of roses, and, I noted with a smile, a small, cheerful collection of garden gnomes near his front walk. He and I became friends. We would have coffee on my porch sometimes, talking about the weather and the quiet joys of watching things grow. The HOA even sent me a formal, written apology, which I accepted and filed away in the now dormant Brenda folder. The gate is still there. I thought about taking it down, but I decided to leave it. It's a monument of a sort, a monument to the idea that a line on a map means something, that a word in a document has weight. It's a quiet, black, steel reminder. The peace is not a passive state. Sometimes it must be actively defended. Sometimes you have to build a wall to protect your garden. My life has returned to its quiet rhythm. The thermostat clicks. The refrigerator hums. At 6:42 a.m., the red numerals on the coffee maker glow in the dark. I stand at the window with my mug of black coffee and look out at my field. The ruts from Brenda's tires have long since faded, tilled under and replanted. This year's wheat is tall and healthy, a uniform sea of gold. It grows in neat, orderly rows, exactly as it was planted. Everything is in its proper place. The world outside my window is, once again, rational. I kept the key to the padlock. It hangs on a small hook by the back door. I don't think I'll ever need to use it again. But I keep it. It's not a trophy, it's a receipt. It's the final piece of documentation in a long and wearying project. A project about the meaning of ownership, the nature of rules, and the quiet satisfaction of a thing being precisely, immutably, and demonstrably correct. On paper and on the land itself. The quiet is back, and this time, I know its value down to the last documented decimal point.